Hello and welcome to the Ben Cotton Podcast, a brief weekly encouragement for your Wednesday morning. And this is episode 10. Today I'm thinking about pain, struggle, hardship, life, and how we get through it, but also how we can actually flourish in it and be fruitful despite it. It's a difficult topic, complicated, brings up lots of interesting emotions in all of us, I think. Everything from fear to anxiety, pain, sorrow, all sorts of things. But we're going to end on a high note. We won't be too depressing today, so let's get into it. Welcome aboard. Now, it occurs to me that maybe you're sitting there right now listening to me talk, and your life thus far has really been nothing but peaches and roses. It's entirely possible. It's rare, but possible. Everyone likes you. Your daddy left you with a trust fund, you have the genetics of a Norse god, and you were always optimistic. But for all the rest of us, this is a topic we're all very interested in, because life is pain. It isn't only pain. Okay, don't get too pessimistic. It's not only pain. Life has lots of great things, lots of joys, lots of happiness, lots of stories that end with, riding off into the sunset, into the great beyond. And life can be good. It's not all pain, but life is pain. There's no way to live and not experience pain. It's part of the deal. So we need to face this up front, because to live is to at times suffer. You're not entitled to a life free of hardship. It's not owed to you. It's one of the hardest things about growing up, is learning that simple truth. And it really has little to do with what you do or don't do with your life. Even if you somehow make all the right moves in your life, which no one does, but let's just say for the sake of argument, if you did all the right things, made all the right moves, best decisions, pain is still going to come your way. You can't stop it. Rich people suffer, poor people suffer, happy people, sad people, introverts, extroverts. Kids with no daddy, daddies with no kids. Smart people, dumb people, everybody has pain. Everybody has a burden to carry, a cross to carry. Yet still we tend to compare our hardship with others, don't we? We kind of grade it. We grade our sorrow over against theirs, and what's gone well for us, what hasn't gone well for us, how difficult things have been. And we kind of compare that to other people's suffering, and we make judgments about them and about ourselves. We really have to be careful about this, especially if you feel that your suffering in life is greater than everyone else's, which is not that uncommon. It's the human heart that wants to feel this way. Because when you start to belittle someone else's struggle by magnifying your own, you are in the beginning stages of developing a victim mentality that leads to all sorts of maladies of the soul. That comparison of pain, who's suffered more, who's handled it better, only leads to bitterness and resentment, because everyone feels their burden in life differently. Just think about little children. My child, when he was tiny, would act utterly brokenhearted when he barely skinned his knee in the front yard. Just a tiny little scrape, little raspberry on the knee, seemed to just be the end of his life. He could cry and weep and just wail like his life was over. Take me to the hospital. I think it needs to be amputated, kind of thing. To him at that age and that level of maturity, it was the end of his world. But now that same injury is like nothing to him. So we have to be careful how we judge other people's hardship and resist that desire to compare. Comparison is the enemy of faith, and it's the enemy of compassion. It's the friend of bitterness and resentment. It's the seeds of a victim identity growing in your heart. So before we even really talk about hardship and what it all means and what it's all for and how to respond to it, we need to address that issue of comparison. If you're doing that, then be warned, be careful, because there's victimhood is growing in your soul, and it's deadly stuff. So don't do that. I heard a quote the other day that really stood out to me, and it's really what prompted me to do this podcast. And here it is. I'll just give it to you, and then we'll talk about it for a second. It says, "He who has a why to live for can bear almost any how." He who has a why to live for can bear almost any how. Now think about that for a minute. By the way, I'm not going to tell you who said it because it might turn you off. You can go Google it if you want to. But what does this mean? He means that if you know why you're doing what you're doing, you will keep doing it even when it's hard to do it, even when it's costly. If you know why you get up in the morning, why you exist, if you know your purpose, then when hardship comes, you'll endure it and not quit. The why gets you through the how. So that's what he means when he says, he who has a why to live for can bear almost any how. And so the big question, obviously, is what's your why? Why do you exist? Well, for the Christian, that's actually fairly simple to answer. Ultimately, the answer is Jesus. Just like in Sunday school, the right answer was always Jesus. Well, that's the right answer here. But let's get more specific. Hebrews 12:7 gives us some insights here. He says, the author of Hebrews says, "Endure hardship as discipline. God is treating you as sons." Endure hardship as discipline. God is treating you as sons. And so in both places we see that suffering it's not about knowing why you're suffering. That question of why is a fruitless question, at least in terms of not why you exist, but why is this happening? Why is this difficult thing happening? Why did I get diagnosed with this illness? Why did my loved one pass away? Why can't I keep a job? Why? There's never an answer to that question. And it's really the wrong question. It reveals a problem, which is you don't know why you exist. That's the real question. What's your purpose? And is there purpose then in the suffering? So Hebrews says, endure hardship as discipline. God is treating you as sons. Now, it's important to remember here when I say the word discipline, we're not talking about punishment. It's a big issue. Most of us conflate punishment and discipline and think of them as the same thing. I don't know why. Maybe it's because our parents didn't discipline us well, or who knows. But discipline is instruction. It's training. It's teaching. It isn't punishment. So when you discipline your kids, ideally what you're doing is you're saying, this behavior is going to ruin your life, and it is an offense to God. It's going to destroy your relationships. It's going to destroy you. It's going to make life hard for you. I need to teach you how to act differently, how to live differently, how to feel differently. And so we discipline our children, hoping to train them how to be adults. We don't want to discipline our kids just because we're mad and we want to get back at them. Punishment is about justice. Discipline is about training. And so when Hebrews says endure hardship as discipline, we could say endure hardship or receive hardship as training. God is treating you as sons. So there's a couple of things we can learn from this that are super powerful when we're going through hardship. One, we can set aside the question of the origin of the hardship and instead simply choose to receive all hardship as instruction, training, discipline from the hand of God. So he's emphasizing, the phrasing there is really great because he's emphasizing our attitude in response to the hardship, not emphasizing where it's coming from or why it's coming at all. So the question of why is this coming is not in play in this verse at all. It's how am I going to respond to it? What is my attitude in response to the hardship? Be careful here, though. We're walking a funny line. This does not mean that God is going to keep beating you until morale improves. You're not going to keep going around the same idea until you finally learn this hidden moral ethic that you didn't know before. And once you learn it and discover it, suddenly you'll no longer have cancer or no longer have a difficult time. A lot of people feel this way when things go wrong, things go bad, things get hard in their life. They think God must be teaching me a lesson. And once I learn that lesson, then he'll stop with this. God is not going to beat you until morale improves. It's not how he operates. That's not discipline. That's more of a punishment mentality. It's just not about a specific moral lesson or ethic God's trying to teach you. He's trying to grow your character to be more like him. And so we set aside all the theological quibbling about, well, is God doing it or is God allowing it? And all of those quibbling questions that actually only produce more anxiety in the midst of hardship than they do peace. And instead, the emphasis is on just receive, look at every hardship in your life and stop asking, where is this coming from and why is it happening? And begin to ask yourself, how am I going to respond to this? How do I receive this? And the answer to that is, I receive this as training from God and how to be more like him. That makes a tremendous difference in how you're in your fruitfulness in the midst of pain in your life. Second thing we can learn from this, and I'm sure there's more than two, but it's only a 15-minute podcast, okay? Number two is if we receive hardship as discipline, then the discipline becomes a sign of God's love and acceptance. Look at the second part of that verse. God is treating you as sons. Bad fathers ignore their kids. Bad fathers don't discipline their kids. Good fathers discipline them. They pay attention to them. They train them. They teach them. They provide consequences for behavior that is destructive and is going to bring death and decay in their life. So having this attitude about enduring or receiving hardship as training or discipline from God will actually lead you into a better relationship with God. So when you receive hardship as punishment instead of discipline, or as maybe just the randomness of life, that's really the atheist perspective, which ironically, a lot of Christians tend to respond to difficulty as well. This is just life. It's just random. It's not random either. So Hebrews 12:7 shows us that. We receive all difficulty, all hardship, all suffering, all pain in life as if it were discipline from God. And if it's discipline from God, that is a sign that he's a good father and he loves me. He's paying attention to me. He's training me. He loves me enough to teach me. It's like I like to joke around sometimes saying, I pray and ask God to give me patience, but I don't want to have to learn patience. And God always says, well, I'm not just going to give you patience. I'm going to teach it to you. And how does that happen? That happens quite often by hardship. There's really no other way to learn something like patience. Most of the fruit of the Spirit are like this. We learn it through difficulty and struggle. We learn it by getting it wrong. So when you receive hardship as punishment, we just simply ask this one, stop asking the why question. Why is this happening? And ask the question of yourself, how am I going to respond? Then that's going to lead you into a tighter and closer relationship with God instead of the opposite, which is this must be punishment from God or this is random. Either way, I'm running away from God. I'm going to be angry at God. I'm going to get bitter and resentful. And bitterness and resentment is the beginning of a self-destructive identity. You begin to think of yourself as the victim of the world and the victim of God. Anger grows in your heart. Resentment towards God and everyone else grows in your heart. And you get more ugly and more, your responses to things become shorter and more extreme. You start embarrassing yourself in public because you lose your temper at somebody in the parking lot. Those sorts of things. When that kind of thing happens, it's because resentment and bitterness has grown in your heart. Living a life of bitterness, even though you have plenty of evidence to back up your bitterness, it's a miserable way to live. And it provides you with no strength for enduring difficult times. So finding comfort and healing in the middle of hardship is really a separate topic for another day. But I want to say this, because I know there are probably people out there that have suffered incredibly difficult things. Maybe you are suffering an incredibly difficult thing right now, this very moment, and your soul is just sort of flatlining. You know you're really suffering when you don't feel anything, and you go sort of numb. So this is not just a philosophical or even purely theological question for you. It's where you're living right now. You're living in the middle of this. And so I want to paint for you a picture from a story about Jesus. When Jesus' friend Lazarus got sick and died, Jesus went to see him at the grave. And it's this powerful moment where we get to see Jesus with someone he was personally close to. And we see him interact with the people, the family, and his friends at the funeral. And he goes to the grave where the family is, and there's weeping and the whole thing, as you can imagine. And Jesus had already decided that he was going to raise Lazarus from the dead. He's about to do it. He's about to call Lazarus out of the grave, and the greatest miracle he ever performed, next to his own resurrection. But what he does before that is maybe the most interesting, at least to me, which is he looks around and he sees his friends and family weeping, and he begins to weep with them, knowing that he's about to raise Lazarus. So this is not about him missing Lazarus. He's full of empathy. He is so full of empathy that he weeps. And if you look at the original language there, it's a weeping like out of control, emotive expression of grief and sorrow. He's weeping on their behalf. Scripture says that Jesus is acquainted with sorrow. He knows it inside and out. So remember this when things are hard. Remember that Jesus is acquainted with your sorrow. He knows it inside and out. And he knows it actually probably better than you. And he weeps alongside you, even though he already knows how he is going to bring you through it, even if it's by his own power and none of yours. He knows what he's going to do. He knows the miracle he's going to perform in you, yet he still weeps with you. He is full of compassion. So that's your thought for today. Remember that Jesus is compassionate towards you. He knows your suffering. And if you will simply ask the right question, not why is this happening, but what's my why for existing? What's my purpose? If my purpose is to grow and become more like Jesus, then I can receive this hardship as training for that end, for that goal. And that will lead me to the feet of Jesus instead of away from him. I hope this lifts you up a little bit today. Remember to subscribe at my website, bencotton.net. That's BENCOTTEN.net. Share this episode if you liked it, if you think it'll encourage someone else. That keeps me getting up in the morning too. It helps me keep doing this podcast, keeps me motivated. So appreciate all your support. We'll see you next time.